Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. A diverse and healthy ecosystem is essential for life as we know it. Vermont is situated in a key location to support biodiversity, not just nationally, but internationally as well. We live in a critical area for numerous species as climate changes disrupt habitat and put plants and animals at risk. To help us understand why Vermont is so important, we've invited Jens Hawkins-Hilke, a conservation planning biologist with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. Welcome, Jens.
Thanks so much.
So, we hear a lot about biodiversity these days, but to get us on the same page, what does that term refer to?
Well, biodiversity really refers to all living things on Earth, and that's at all its different levels. So I'm talking about from species to entire ecosystems.
And why is that important?
Well, without biodiversity, our entire support system for life on this planet would collapse. We rely on nature to provide us with food and clean water and a lot of different medicines and to prevent flooding and other extreme weather events.
And so, what is happening with the world's biodiversity? What's being lost and why? What are the causes? We might know some, but there are many we probably aren't aware of.
Yeah, well, according to NatureServe, over 1/3 of species and ecosystems in the United States are at risk of disappearing. And that threatens everything that the natural world offers us, from food systems to mitigating the impacts of extreme weather events. And then connected with declining biodiversity is this concept of climate change. The Nature Conservancy estimates that entire populations are adjusting their home ranges on average about 11 miles per decade north and south of the equator. So there's a huge reshuffling going on in terms of what lives where.
So, I'm sorry, Jens, this is a remarkable animation that is showing the migration of mammals, amphibians, and birds that scientists have figured out.
Yeah, this is work from the Nature Conservancy, and it looks at the likely direction of over 2,000 species of mammals, birds, and amphibians, and where they'll adjust their range in the face of this changing climate. And you can really see the bottleneck in the Northeast and what a central location Vermont plays in that reshuffling of species across the country.
Right, and about a mile every year.
Yeah.
That things are shifting. That's really extraordinary. So let's talk about Vermont's role. How does it play into the global picture here, the global biodiversity?
Yeah, well, the Northern Appalachians are the most intact, temperate, deciduous forest on Earth.
Wow.
And in Vermont alone, we have an estimated 24 to 43,000 species, and we're largely forested. You can see on screen that diversity of species and just how many of them we really don't know that much about. Tens of thousands of invertebrate species and fungi and algae, just incredible biological diversity, and yet so little is known. But because Vermont is largely forested, we can provide a connected pathway for plants and animals to adjust their range in the face of this changing world.
Terrific. And just in that chart, it's pretty remarkable that you're not even sure between 24 and 43 is a pretty big range. 1,000 species, but also that I think it was around 10 o'clock, there was this teeny little strip that is the vertebrates, which is us. I mean, we're a little fraction, but all of those things together make up biodiversity and an ecosystem that's important for our life as well as everybody else's, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So tell us about the activities that you and the state are involved in around biodiversity.
Yeah, well, I work with Vermont municipalities on land use planning. So in Vermont, it's largely up to the towns to decide where development happens or doesn't happen. So if we want to maintain a pattern of intact, connected, and diverse forests, well, we need to work with the towns to plan for development in thoughtful ways. We're using Vermont conservation design to do that. And this is a prioritization. It's showing us the most important lands and waters for maintaining ecological function. And so I would use maps like this at the town level to show them what's most important and where.
Well, and a map like this is a decade in the making, right? I mean, it's a lot of studying to really understand where connected lands are, what's intact, what's not, what are forests, what are, how can migration actually happen?
Absolutely, and we're currently doing yet another update of the Vermont conservation design because we're trying to capture not only current biological diversity but climate resilience, where diversity will happen in the future.
Oh. And the next graphic is also interesting. I'm sure you take this to towns. So we've zoomed in and explain a little bit about what this is and how you might work with towns with an image like this.
Yeah, well, this is really the land pattern that we're looking for across towns and across Vermont. And so I use this image quite a bit to express the ingredients in the recipe, if you will. And so you can see those core forest blocks. Those are the biggest forest blocks in your town. And you can see that there's one on the left and there's one on the right. And so those are the anchors of our biological diversity. But then we have these connecting forest blocks in the middle. They may not be as big as the anchor blocks, but because of their position, you can't get from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen without going through the middle. Those smaller forest blocks in the right places are important stepping stones. And then we have these micro connectors, things like wildlife road crossing, where there are trees on both sides of the road, and the entire network of streams and rivers. All of those help connect and make this land use pattern that we're looking for.
Wow. So you work with a lot of different types of people. You work with towns, but you also have other partnerships. What partnerships are involved in this work?
Well, this work takes us into a variety of different partnerships. And I just wanted to speak to some of the department's extensive ongoing biological monitoring work for plants, invertebrates, birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. You can think of some of the recent rare plant discoveries as an example. And those are worked on partnerships. We can also talk about the Staying Connected initiative. And that's a binational public-private partnership focused on ecological connectivity across the entire Northern Appalachians. And that involves using the best science to plan land use and land protection and work with the agencies of transportation to figure out how to mitigate the impact of roads. Great. That's just one example of the type of partnerships we're engaged in.
And of course, we're crossing national borders into Canada, who are very much a part of that connected network. That was just something was pulled from their website. So, we think of Vermont Fish and Wildlife as a place to go for hunting and fishing licenses and information. Of course, conservation is also key for those endeavors. How do biodiversity goals fit into the many mandates of your department?
Well, the mission of the department is the conservation of all fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the people of Vermont. That's a huge mission. It's taking us in a lot of different directions, but we're really firmly focused on that broad mandate. Vermont Conservation Design is an example of looking at that bigger picture and helping to coordinate conservation action across all of the conservation partners in Vermont.
So, go ahead. Yeah, please.
We're the largest owners of wetlands in Vermont. Perhaps you didn't know that. We're continuing to conserve and restore wetlands throughout the Champlain Basin. And that is going to help improve water quality, flood resilience, and habitat for fish and wildlife. We're also working to understand the changing landscape of wildlife diseases and how to manage them to ensure the health of our wildlife. And that's from fungal issues with bats and reptiles to chronic wasting disease and avian influenza. So there's a huge number of directions the department is moving at once to really focus on biological diversity across the board.
Terrific. And I want you to tell us a little bit more about how you work with towns to help them with the conservation plans.
Well, it's a lot of night meetings. uh, Vermont is largely run by volunteers on conservation commissions, planning commissions, and helping them to understand these issues and to understand how to bring these issues into their town and their town planning process is really my job. So I do a lot of education with communities and help them to wrestle with what that means for their future.
So what can Vermonters do to help with sustaining biodiversity?
Well, I think education is the most important first step. And knowing more about your land or lands in your town, that's the piece that's going to help you celebrate where you live. And it's also going to help you want to learn more. And then I think the next step is really getting involved locally and join your town conservation commission, volunteer with your town government. In Vermont, decisions are overwhelmingly made locally. And I think the future is determined by those who show up.
Terrific. And I assume also towns need to cooperate with each other. There are adjacent forests, and you've just described how absolutely essential forests are for biodiversity and the economy for our state, much less. But do towns cooperate, do you find?
Absolutely. There are a variety of multi-town initiatives. And thinking about the forest economy is a way of finding consensus across towns and understanding what the forests and the species in those forests do for us and our economy. It's not just ecological values that the forests and biological diversity bring, but also economic benefits and community benefits.
Great.
So there's this huge range.
So for more information, people can go to vtfishandwildlife.com. Jens, thank you so much for explaining this and for the really important work that you and the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department do.
Thanks. It's been a real pleasure.
And once again, thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.